Speech will start in 3, 2, and 1. There's a truth that proposition must understand. If a company goes bankrupt or they collapses, the investors themselves will be heavily affected. In fact, they will be so affected since they're the one who accumulate large amounts of stocks from those companies, and they're one of the investors from those companies as well. So which side is able to benefit the publicly traded companies? First of all, by benefiting, we mean that those companies will have a strong and stable partner and extremely important in businesses. And second of all, they will have informed decision making. Third of all, they'll have accountability. This means when investors are accountable for their actions, and those traded companies know that they're not alone and they all have their backups behind them. And finally, they get enough votes in investment. Overall, we simply believe that we take this debate from the very start, since we emphasize on how a strong partnership is needed, especially between investors and the companies. People or institutions invest because they see potential and they want to help the company thrive. So a couple of clarification is that proposition can't continue saying how institutional investors hold too much power and they basically don't know what's best for their companies. Instead, what they should do is that they should be able to prove to us in order to win is that number one, how is stability on your side much better when they don't allow their investors who accumulate stocks from their own company to have enough voting rights on important issues? And how will publicly traded companies benefit from this altogether? And if these large institutions are so powerful, then what is actually stopping them from influencing like smaller shareholders altogether? And this is what we simply believe, because they are powerful. Yes, we understand that, and they want to make the voting rights, they vote based on what they believe is best for their country. So the problem still exists from their side, because by then proposition does nothing from stopping those large institutions or large institution investors from influencing other small shareholders. So coming to our main clashes in this debate, first of all, the clash here is on which side is actually benefit more publicly traded companies and the influence. So we'll explain why on our side, the influence is actually good and actually benefits the publicly traded companies. We explain this on 3 factors. First of all, number 1 is none other than stability. Second is on partnership. And finally is on credibility. So on stability, what has the other side said to us? First of all, they said that this will weaken competition, and those investors don't align with the public companies. We don't understand how this can actually happen, because competition only happens when investors and the company themselves work together, and most importantly, grant them the right to be able to vote on policy or how the company operates. And proposition must remember that the most influential person in the company is still the CEO or the head of the company, which has been proven really clearly before. And this means investors, they might have the right to vote on such important issues, but most importantly, they act as a crucial advisors to the companies themselves. And second of all, they also said to us that this will create uncertainty in the business, and companies, they are often perceived as vulnerable, and this will affect their policy, this will affect the way they operate, etc. We believe that companies, they actually benefit from the stability. They actually benefit from having large, consistent shareholders who vote and who make decisions on what they think is best for the company. Companies benefit so much from this, because limiting their rights would basically damage the decision making, will empower more short-term speculators, and this will potentially lead to outcomes, very inconsistent outcomes. And we believe that those investors, they're mostly professional, right? So those investors, they would want to bring the good to the table. And also the other side, they say that this will make the company lose control over their own company. Proposition is simply missing the point, because investors, they play a big part, and in fact companies, they benefit a lot from having this stability, from having a large consistent shareholders, right? We see that stability happens when your investors actively engage in the operation of the company. This is to say that they get the rights to vote and have a say on important issues. And we heard that propositions specifically say that they describe to us how limiting the voting right will look like. They say that limiting the voting rights will simply look like the investors, they will still invest normally, but it's just that they don't have enough rights to make a say in those companies, to like vote on important issues like policy or how the company operates. So we say that this is like extremely bad, because remember that those are big asset management firms, meaning that they want to gain benefits themselves. And if they want to gain benefit for themselves, that means they also want the company to thrive in return, so that their investment is somehow actually worth it. And if you only allow investors to invest without actually taking them seriously when they want to make a vote, or when they want to kind of like challenge the company on some specific policy, that is simply how business works. You have investors and you allow them to have a say in your own company, and this will in turn be so beneficial. Why is that? Because when investors, they actually have a say in companies, this means that they will trust the company more, and they'll be able to have a say in those companies, and they will potentially advise those publicly traded companies to make informed decisions on what they have to say when it comes to policy making, or when it comes to, represent many other individual investors and vote on behalf of those investors and shape the corporate policy on issues ranging from like management or even some responsibility. Second of all, we want to say how on our side we still have control over our company, right? Because we have control. On our side, we benefit so much more from propositions simply because we have something that their side doesn't have, which is none other than a strong partnership from those strong investors and credibility. Because notice that from the very beginning, we have mentioned really clearly on accountability, right? This means when investors, they hold accountable for their action, which means that when a company collapses, or when a company, they face challenges, right? So noted that when you allow those investors to still have voting rights inside your company, no matter what they say, then they will still abide by your rules even when you have specific challenges, or when you're facing collapses when it comes to operating a company. So this means that they will still hold accountable for their actions, and those traded companies, they will be pretty sure that they will be not alone. But what will happen on their side when they limit the voting rights of those large institutional investors in publicly traded companies? Simple. It's very simple how it will look like. First of all, when they limit the voting rights, then simply those investors will no longer have much of a say in this, which means that they will no longer engage in the operation of a company. Now notice that a person who invests in a company because they want to have a say, because they want to have power in the company, and they want to help the company thrive. So overall, we're very proud to oppose, because we simply prove to you how stability only happens when investors, they actively engage in the operation of the company. That proposition only proved to us one simple liner, that simply publicly traded companies will lose control, and they have never proven to us how investors will still likely have a chance to continue invest in those publicly traded companies. So very proud to oppose.